Hello, my name's Moira and I'm the Women's Pastoral Worker here at Ebenezer Mould. I'm going to be talking to you about loss. This last year has been difficult in a way that none of us has ever experienced before. I wonder what it's been like for you. Every one of us has been impacted in some way, whether we've stopped to think about it or not. Maybe you're simply frustrated with the ongoing restrictions, being told where you can go and when. Maybe you're feeling lonely and isolated, as we've had to stay socially distanced from one another. Days can seem so long and empty when we're not able to meet with friends and family. Perhaps you're worried about your child's education and what impact all the disruption is going to have on their prospects for the future. Or perhaps you've had the distress of seeing your job disappearing and you're worried about the finances for your family going forward. And our hearts go out to so many families who've lost loved ones and are mourning and grieving at this time. In all of these situations, we've lost something, and there are many others that we could list. So many things that we've taken for granted and not realised how precious they are to us. Our freedom, our families, the joy of learning, meaningful work. Take a moment to recognise what has been taken from you without so much as a by your leave. And notice how it has left you feeling, perhaps sad or helpless. Maybe you feel broken. Or are you angry and anxious, or perhaps just plain exhausted? Or maybe you're hopeful for the future and you're at peace, or perhaps it's a jumbled mix of all of these things. What do we do with such a swirl of emotion going on in our hearts? Maybe it leaves you feeling confused, not really knowing what you feel anymore. Or perhaps you think it's time for the British upper lip to come to the fore. There's a pandemic to be sorted out. This is no time to be thinking about how I feel. Let me tell you about a woman who knew something of the struggles that we've been going through. You can read this in Mark chapter 5, verses 21 to 34. A large crowd followed and pressed around Jesus, and a woman who was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She'd suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Immediately, her bleeding stopped and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realised that power had gone out from him. He turned round in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered, "and yet you can ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking round to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." As far as we know, the woman who met Jesus was an ordinary woman of her day. We don't know her name. She probably had family and friends, and sufficient wealth to be able to pay for medical care, such as it was in those days. And then one day it all came crashing down around her. The woman developed a problem with her health, a problem that would have serious consequences for her in many different ways. She began to bleed, and it kept on and on and on. She would have become anemic. She would have felt constantly worn out and desperate for the bleeding to stop. In her culture, her bleeding meant that she had to perform an extreme version of social distancing. God's law, designed for the good of his people, of whom she was one, meant people in her own household would have to keep their distance from her, so that she didn't contaminate them with her condition. No one would touch her. No one would sit in a chair that she had sat on. No one would sleep in a bed that she had slept in. If she had a husband, and we don't know, but he wouldn't have slept with her. She wasn't allowed to go to the synagogue to worship, as under God's law she was unclean. So she was cut off from God, from her family, from her friends, all those she knew and loved. She had to live in conditions that were similar to COVID isolation, but not just for 10 days, but until her bleeding stopped. Imagine how she would have felt as the months and years rolled by and the bleeding continued, the loneliness and despair as friends and family were separated from her. She must have been so sad and lonely and fearful for her future, wondering how long this would go on for. She trusted God and would have prayed for his help, but he appeared not to be answering. Maybe she felt angry that this had happened to her and to her family. Separated from them and society, she was cut off from everyone. Her situation was extreme compared with ours, but does it sound similar in some way to any of the experiences we've had this year? Well, this lady had to put up with this for 12 long years. There was no NHS to help her. She was so desperate to regain her lost health that she spent everything she had on trying to find a medical cure, but the doctors weren't able to help her. If anything, she got sicker. And now she had lost her finances and the security that they brought her, as well as her relationships. It was one crushing disappointment after another for her for 12 long years. There was nothing more that she could do to help herself. Her situation was hopeless. Then the woman heard about Jesus. We know she hadn't lost her faith in God because she believed that if she could just reach out and touch Jesus' clothes, she would be healed. Trusting that Jesus could help her gives this woman huge courage to work her way through the crowd around Jesus. This was a massive risk for her because if she touched someone, they would have become unclean and had to go through a ritual cleansing process. But she comes up behind Jesus, reaches out, touches his cloak, and is instantly healed. She hoped that her action would go unnoticed and she could just slip away quietly and get on with her life. But Jesus doesn't let that happen. His reaction to this woman is helpful for us to consider. Jesus was on his way to heal a dying child of a very important man, but he stops in his tracks. He looks and asks for whoever has touched him to come forward. He persists until the woman comes to him. Why does he do this? Well, the woman can see that she isn't going to get away with hiding amongst the crowd, so she does come forward. She falls at Jesus' feet in complete humility, demonstrating his authority and lordship to everyone watching. She then shows amazing courage in front of the crowd and tells her whole story to Jesus, with everybody listening. It all comes out. Her losses, her health problems, her fears, something that would have been so embarrassing and shameful for her to talk about. No wonder she was trembling with fear. But by opening up and telling Jesus the whole story of what had happened in her life, Jesus is able to openly address her real needs. Jesus publicly demonstrates how much this lowly woman is loved by him. He restores her into a loving relationship with himself, the Son of God, by gently and lovingly calling her daughter. Imagine what impact that single word, daughter, would have had on someone who had been separated from family, society, and from worshipping God for so long. She's very publicly and lovingly accepted by Jesus in the middle of a packed crowd. He confirms and validates her public confession of faith in him, a moment she can look back to and take strength from should her faith be tested by others in the future. He tells her her faith has healed her. All the prayers she has prayed and appeared to have gone unheard for so long have been answered as she meets Jesus. He demonstrates to her that he is faithful and powerful beyond anything we can imagine, and she can truly trust him. He gives her the gift of his peace. How she needed to receive that, to heal the fears she'd lived with for so long. And finally, he confirms she is healed and freed from her suffering, something that others needed to hear should they think that she is still unclean. She's now able to take her place in her family and in the synagogue congregation, worshipping God as Jesus has publicly pronounced her clean. Whatever you are struggling with right now, whatever situation you find yourself in, look at how Jesus responds to this woman and know that he cares for you just as much. He really wants to meet her. She's so important to him that he refuses to move on to heal a sick child until she's come forward and he has talked with her. He listens to her story with no interruptions. He recognizes her faith in him and lovingly accepts her as she is. He demonstrates publicly how he values her by blessing her in front of everyone. Do you really know and trust the same Jesus that this woman had faith in? I wonder if we really believe, as she did, that Jesus' power and authority is more than a match for our situation. Especially if we've been praying, but nothing seems to change. If anything, perhaps things seem to get worse. Do we keep on trusting our faithful God? Or do we give up because he's not responding in the way that we want and within our time frame? In these difficult times, this Jesus wants to meet with us in our struggles and our suffering. He loves us as much as he loves this woman. Those losses you thought of at the beginning, have you humbly reached out to Jesus in prayer and told him your whole story about your struggles and your suffering? He wants to hear it from you in your own words. If you haven't told him, why not do so? Let him draw near to you in these hard times. He always has time to listen to us and can help us in ways that no one else can. So often we come to Jesus last, but we should come to him first, because he's the only one who can meet all our true needs. How have you been responding to your changed circumstances? We often find ourselves responding to difficult situations with frustration, We want to be in control of our lives, so we worry when we're not, and our fears can become overwhelming. Or maybe you grumble and get angry, perhaps taking it out on others. We look to other things for comfort, anything that makes us feel better. But our sinful responses rob us of true, lasting peace. If we reach out in faith to Jesus and own up to how we're responding, he will cleanse us in the same way that he cleanses the woman from her suffering. If we ask, he will forgive us and give us his enduring peace in the midst of our struggles. Why not talk to a trusted friend over the phone and share together what you are feeling bereft of? Really listen to each other. Share about how you're responding to your situations. Pray together for God's help to see where your heart needs to change. Ask for God's forgiveness for those times when your responses to your situation are coming from a selfish or a proud heart. Thank him for where you can see the Holy Spirit at work. Encourage each other, taking hope from the Jesus in this woman's story, a Jesus with power and authority greater than any situation life will throw at us. Come to Jesus in faith. Reach out to him. Pour out your heart to him. He wants us to believe in him and be saved, to understand that we are loved as a son or a daughter, but his love is so much more than any human parent can give us. He will never leave us or forsake us, and he will give us his peace as we take that simple act of faith. If you would like to talk to me about what you've just heard, please just get in touch. Thank you.